Hi, my name's Tim Titchmarsh from .NET Architect. We're an IronSpeed specialist company based in London, UK. Today we're going to talk about code customizations in IronSpeed 9.2. IronSpeed will create the interface and all the code, whether that's C# or VB. So day to day you don't necessarily need to get into the code behind, especially with the new formula feature that IronSpeed can boast, but should you need to roll up your sleeves and start customizing some of the code, you'll need to dig a bit deeper into the bowels. Now, if you're a .NET developer, you'll know all the functionality, you'll know all the terminology of pages, user controls, etc. If you're new to .NET Framework, I would suggest that you do a bit of reading and background research on .NET in general and the framework, just so that you're fully prepared to understand the samples we're giving today. Although the samples will be simple, the concepts involved do require some knowledge of the framework. Okay, so where do we start? That is a common question. You know, I need to do X. Where do I do it? How do I do it? My approach is the following. I would load, as we've got here, the project into IronSpeed, and I'm using IronSpeed 9.2, but most of the code changes are pretty standard these days. From about version 5 the code settled down quite nicely, and you tend to have code behind files for the pages, so it's very easy to find, very easy to locate. For example, if we've got a user page, which you're familiar with, we have a user edit page in this instance and the controls that go with it. So every page that you look at will have a very similar sort of code layout. Okay, you've got the actual ASPX.cs behind and the controls to go with it. Okay, so we've got pages, we've got master pages, we've got controls, user controls, and I'm going to try and demonstrate some capabilities in each of those. So where do we start? We have a problem. Where do I start looking for the solution? Of course, most people may well start, and I would start looking online. If you can find the answer online, brilliant, use it. There's great forums and information on the IronSpeed website that you'll probably find someone's done what you're trying to achieve. But today is a little bit more than that. It's about background information. So we're going to start off by, as we've done, loading in IronSpeed, and let's just take it as an example, as I say, the user control. Sorry, the user table control, the user record control. What I need to do, I need to be able to filter out information. I need to validate what I'm typing in, and I need to make sure that my drop-down lists are correct, and that I can do some sort of post-saving or pre-saving functionality. For example, making sure that emails are valid. Maybe you want to uppercase, lowercase certain parts of the page before saving. So we're going to try those as some examples. So you need to obviously be aware of the layout of IronSpeed, and on the left we have the Application Explorer, as you can see there. So we have the Explorer presentation layer, we have the business layer and the data access layer, and the base classes. Okay, the bits we're really interested in today will be the presentation layer, i.e. the user interface, the business layer, where code is for the business classes, and the data access layer, which talks to the database. So we need to find the user control pages, etc. And we look through the page presentation layer. Obviously they're alphabetically sorted, which makes it very easy to find, and we go through to find our user directory. IronSpeed stores all of the information for the user in the user directory, and that user name is based on the table name. So in the database I have a table called user. Okay, I've also got a table called custom field, and in this example you can see I've got a variety of table pages, controls, etc. for the custom field. So your first point of call is the directory. There's only two levels, the top and the name of the table. You can't add directories beneath custom field or beneath user. So you need to be aware that that's where your code will be. And we'll see that we've got ASPX pages, which are the pages, the UI of course, and we have the code, as I mentioned earlier, tend to be two code files, one behind the page and one behind the controls on the page. So understanding the page is very important. What does a page consist of, and where would you start looking to make your changes? On IronSpeed, if you go to the documentation tab, you'll find that IronSpeed has gone to a great deal of effort to make sure that there's well documented information. Okay, very good for finding out what's going on, the structure of a page. Okay, so you've got my add user page, okay, different pages there, and within an add user page I've got different pieces of information regarding initialization events, page load events, and as you click each one on the right hand side, as you can see, there'll be information, all very useful, and helps you sort of map out where you're going to start the job in hand. And the job in hand we want to start off with is to validate the password, for example, on my user edit user page. I want to make sure, for example, that it's at least 6 characters long. Okay, so I need to sort of locate, as we've done, the page, and I need to be able to locate the control on the page to make sure that I know what's going on and that I can sort of drill down to the appropriate piece. So flipping between pages and documentation will help you understand where you need to go. We're going to deal with it on the edit user, just because we just need to pick one page, and I'm going to do everything on the add user. The add user page is much more complicated because this is straight out of the database, and I haven't tidied it up yet. But so for the purpose of the exercise, we're going to use the edit user page and make sure that the password field, okay, which is of type password, only or has at least 6 characters in it. IronSpeed by default won't enforce any sort of validation on that front. You have to add that yourself. There is no sort of minimum number of characters. Okay, so edit user password, go back to documentation. Okay, edit user, and you can see it's sensitive, so it knew I was on the edit page. Okay, and I need to be in the user control on the page, just to make sure you understand where we are exactly. Use the drop down, master page at the top, then our edit user ASPX page, and then the user control on the page. Okay, and then within the user control I've got my fields, and the field I'm interested in is password. So you need to drill down through the hierarchy, which is true for any .NET application. You'll have this hierarchy of master page, controls, fields. Okay, so it's no different on that front. Then we pick up on the say documentation, user record control, and then there's certain initialization events. There is going and getting password, setting password. Okay, these are all invaluable to you in building up a picture of what it is you're dealing with. Okay, now of course IronSpeed doesn't force this on you. You don't need to know about parsing and validation of the password field unless you really need to use it. And before you consider coding this by hand yourself, first port of call, once you've located what it is to pop into the customize code customization wizard and check through some of the examples. Okay, because in there you've got about 90 odd examples of how to customize, and the wizard will take you through and help you do that. And again, it's sensitive to where you are on the page, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the wizard for the first example, and then we're going to go through and do some hand-coded customizations. So back to our page, back to our edit user page, and our fields. There it is, password. Okay, so that's the field that we need to do some validation on. So code customization wizard. Let's go through the list, and somewhere in there, here we are, validate data. Okay, so we need to validate the field. There's a description of what's going to happen, okay, and a bit of a preview as to how that code will play out. And what IronSpeed will do is it will ask me some questions in a second, and it will fill in the appropriate places where it's got the dollar placeholder with the name of the field, etc. It will then insert that code into our code behind, and then when we build it, that code will be in place, and then we can validate that it works, etc., using Visual Studio. Not forgetting, of course, that IronSpeed isn't a code editing and debugging tool. That's where you need Visual Studio, but it does go quite a way to helping you along the way of actually adding code with an editor it's okay, but it doesn't have IntelliSense to the full extent that Visual Studio has. But if you haven't got Visual Studio, it's still a good way to do your custom coding. So I'm going to go next to get the next question, which is what am I substituting? Well, the record control is going to be the user record control. Obviously, if you've got more than one on a page, you need to make your choice as to which one you're dealing with. And the field that I want to validate from that record control is the password. Okay, so I'm going to pick password. That's it. Now I press next. That's the code that IronSpeed has generated. It's in C# because I'm working in C#. If I was working in Visual Basic, it would be, obviously the customization would be in Visual Basic. We then finish, and behind the scenes, done. IronSpeed has now added that code to the appropriate place, the correct place, which we'll come back to in a second, but just have a quick look at the code within IronSpeed. So we have regions that are marked out so it's easy to see where IronSpeed has put its code customization. There's 1, 2, okay, so that little job took 3 pieces of code customization to pull off in its entirety. Okay, and you'll notice that the code customization is within section 1. Okay, don't put anything in section 2, and IronSpeed certainly won't for code customizations, because section 2 does get overwritten each time IronSpeed rebuilds. Okay, so everything goes into section 1 that you do. Okay, so those customizations, let's just have a look at those. First one is setting up an event handler so that when the page is initialized, we get an initialization event, and in that initialization event, which is here, I want to make sure that my password postback is true, so that when I submit the page and the password gets pulled in and acted upon, I want to, there's a changed event, so when I change it, that will fire off the event, which is down here, the password changed event. And in that changed event, which gets called when the page is submitted, I can validate, and if there's an exception, put up an error. That validate, okay, is down here. And it's again within the code customization region, and that's going to validate that the password text, now the default that the wizard has created is just making sure that it's not blank. We're going to change that to make sure that the length of the characters is greater than 6, for example, or whatever business rule that you need to implement. Okay, and we're going to do that in a second, and we're going to check that out to see if it works. So having done that, we just need to build in the normal way. Let's say yes. Okay. Now, as I said before, we can't debug, so it's very hard to sort of check and test that the code works. So what I am going to do is I am going to go into Visual Studio, and we are going to sort of pull up the Edit User Controls page and put some breakpoints and see what's going on. So let's do that. Okay, so let's go and find, let's close off some of the other. So we need to find the user table. Here we go. And we need to find the edit user. Here we go. Now, because we were editing code within the controls, the file I need is the custom field controls. Okay. And sorry. Wrong one. It's user table, not user. There we go. Edit user. There it is. Now if we look in here, we should see our code customizations. There they are. Code customization, code customization, code customization. Now, when you have a big project, here's a little tip for you here. When you have a big project, it can be tricky sometimes to sort of actually go to where you've made a change. I know that sounds hard to understand, but when you've got sort of 50, 60, 100 tables, each with multiple controls and pages, can be a bit tricky. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close this off within Visual Studio for a second. Click back to IronSpeed, and in the code customization, I am going to put a little comment, and I'm going to use my initials. Okay, Tim. I won't tell you my middle name. Titchmarsh. That's no secret, don't worry. And we're going to use that as a sort of a tag on how to find. So we're going to save that within IronSpeed. Let's just do a rebuild to make sure it all gets captured correctly. Now, when you're running Visual Studio and IronSpeed, you need to be careful that you're not overwriting each other, because obviously they're all dealing with the same source files. Go back into Visual Studio. Now, if I do Control-Shift-F, that will do a find in files. So it'll go through my entire solution looking for example, my initials. And then in the field table below, you'll see there's a few places where my initials are. Okay, the one we're interested in is the edit user controls. Okay, and so sometimes just using your initials or a unique string will take you straight there. So let's just remove those for a second. Code customization. The bit I'm interested in really at the end of the day is my customization of validate. Here we go. So I'm going to put a breakpoint on this line, okay, and leave it as it is at the moment, and then we're going to modify it to change the number of characters test. So what happens is in this particular routine is when it gets called from up here from the text changed event, I'm going to validate. I'm going to call the base validation first to make sure that anything the system wants to do on the validation front is done first. If it fails at that point, of course, it will throw an exception. If it doesn't, it will come into my test, and then if my test fails, it will throw an exception. So let's press F5 and run that now and see what we get. So that's going to compile and build within the Visual Studio. Page will come up in a second. And I've only got one page, well, several pages, but the one page we're interested in today is a list of my users, is my default page. Okay, I haven't done anything with the layout at the moment. This is just a couple of records out of the database, and I want to go and edit my record. Okay, so here's the page, and my password. Okay, so I'm going to leave that blank for the moment. Okay, and I'm going to press save. Now, of course, if I've got validation on the password from within IronSpeed, let's just go and check that. So back to pages, back to edit user, password, and off to the right hand side, I've got a required true. So because that's true, of course, IronSpeed is going to, well, let's try it. IronSpeed is going to catch it before it even gets to the postback. So I imagine if I try and submit that now, okay, which it did, and you probably saw it flash up quick, a password is required. But because we've got the post back on, it's coming up anyway. Okay, so what you would normally do, let me just stop that, go back into, let me just say yes, is to turn off validation at the client level, okay, and the validators that IronSpeed uses, and use my own validation. So I'm going to turn that off, do a quick rebuild. Whilst that's rebuilding, it takes a couple of seconds. Visual Studio, I'm going to go back to that in a minute, stop it from running, and run it from here instead again. So this time I shouldn't get the IronSpeed message. Okay, edit the record, remove the password, which it shouldn't complain about at the front end, and then go and it gets caught at the back end, but without any front end errors at this stage. So I can hover over, and sure enough, the password text is empty. Okay, so that will now throw an exception, which will get caught up here where it was called, and this is how IronSpeed displays an error message: password cannot be empty. Okay. Okay, so let's now stop that, go back into, stop the debugging, go back into IronSpeed. That's okay. Okay, that's using the wizard, and the wizard may or may not give you what you want. In that example, it gave you a number of, or mustn't be empty. I'm going to change it now just to make sure that we've got the number of characters. Okay, and it's not, and as I say, there's nothing to stop you changing the code that IronSpeed presents to you. That's just the way it is. But you don't have to take it as, for example, what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to delete that piece there. Let me just check on that. Now I'm going to leave that there. Just change password. Yeah, 1 second. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to do it slightly differently. That was the code customization IronSpeed produced. So I'm going to effectively remove that piece of code. I'm going to remove that piece and that piece. If I now rebuild this, okay, within Visual Studio, go back into IronSpeed, and it's realized that something's changed. Say yes, okay, and then if I go and look at the code just to confirm, you'll see that the code is gone. Okay, the customization, and this time I'm going to do the change completely without the wizard, but within IronSpeed. Within Visual Studio. So let's go and override the validate events. Okay, what does that mean? Go back into IronSpeed, and you'll notice if we go back to our page, our edit user page, okay, and we're looking at, just to refresh, edit user page, edit user control, fields, password, okay, and we can look at the code, okay, in the little panel here, sub panel, and one of the events is the validate event, which is what we've effectively got on our back end. Okay, you can't see it at the moment within section 1 because it's actually within section 2, but you're not allowed to touch section 2 if you remember. So what you have to do is you have to override, and what IronSpeed is telling you is you need to override the validate event. Okay, and I can either now say yep, I want to use that, okay, or if I don't want to use it, I just want to do it all within IronSpeed, I can do that as well. Okay, so I can start typing public override validate, and there we go. So now we're not touched section 2, but when section 2 gets called, actually we're overriding the functionality. Okay, if I did want to, and it's probably good practice to call the base validation first, then that's what that line there does. Now I want to make sure that my password dot text dot length is greater than 6. Okay. If it is, great. If it's less than 6, then I want to throw a new application exception saying something like password must be at least 6 characters. Okay. Now, of course, I could do much more on the validation. I could make sure it's got uppercase characters, it's got numbers in, punctuation, etc. But let's just keep it simple. And again, I'm going to put a breakpoint there. I'm going to run the code, and we're going to see what happens when we submit the page without a password length greater than 6. Okay, so we're going to edit again. Let's just put a couple. Now, the fact that the password may be wrong doesn't really matter. Okay, so the length is 2, which is correct. Okay, so that's going to now throw an exception, and up comes the message saying it must be at least 6 characters. Okay, and it stays on that page, that piece. So that's how you would do it, either using the wizard or using your own code. Okay, so we're in. Now if I go back to IronSpeed, of course, it will detect that I've got that change there. And when I go back to controls and scroll down, you can see there it is. Now I could have typed that within IronSpeed, of course, but then I would have lost out some of the. I mean, IronSpeed is great, but it's not Visual Studio sort of thing. And so for code customizations, I use Visual Studio. And that's what this is all about, so that's why we're going to stay in Visual Studio. Okay, so let's do another code get. Let's go and do another. Let's check, for example, if we run the code again, oops, and bring up the page, let's work out what else we can do. on that page, just to sort of do another code customization on that page. We could spend all day doing different code customizations because there is so much you can do in the .NET framework, as I'm sure you understand. Let's say this time I want to make sure that the surname has the correct case. Okay, so if I was to spell it lowercase, I would want to change that when I come to save. So how would I go about that? Now there's several ways you could do this. Some are more right than others. Where would you put the code? I could do it on the save event. I could do it on the validation, although that's probably not the best place. But if you look a bit deeper and read the documentation, you'll see there's a series of calls that IronSpeed makes to get and set each of those fields on the page. So really, when I get the information out of the form, I want to do that job then before anything else happens. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to stop that now. Stop my debugging. And again, if I wanted to use IronSpeed as the reference point, I could use the documentation. Okay, and look here, get password. Okay, and then if I right click, insert password method. Okay, add code customization. You've already seen the wizard. So I could, using IronSpeed, just pop in a method. Okay, it doesn't do much at this stage. Alright, but it puts it in the right place so that then I can save that, go back into Visual Studio and say yes, and there it appears. Okay, let me just format that, Control KD, just in case you didn't know, formats the whole page with all the correct formatting and brace layout, which is quite nice. Another tip there. Okay, so we're overriding the get password, but what does base get password? Let's go and have a look. If we go into the definition, okay, you'll see where it does a bit of trimming and checking of what the password is. Okay, actually, let me that's good enough for the password, but of course what I did say we would do is, let me just bring up the page, user control, we were going to do it on the surname. So let's do that again, documentation, record control, get surname, right click, insert get surname method. There we go. Okay, and if we go back in, save that back into Visual Studio, update the page. Let's go back to the top, our section 1, don't forget. And there it is. Let's just go and check out what get surname does. Go to definition. And what it's doing effectively is putting the information that it gets out of the text box, okay, into the surname field of our table user table control. Okay, what we need to do is to override that functionality. I don't want that to happen. I want to make sure the case is correct before this gets called. So what we're going to do is we're going to override get surname. Because it's marked as virtual means we can override it. Okay, but let's just make a copy of that line there because I'm going to need that in a minute. Okay, so we're going to copy that back up to the top, and okay, so we don't want to call the base this time. Okay, what we want to do is, this is what the base effectively is doing, but I'm going to make a temporary variable string, let's call it temp, and then we're going to use the surname, okay, into there. Then we're going to do a bit of processing here, and then we're going to assign the result back in there here, like that. Okay. So in the processing, I need to be able to write a function or call a function that can turn the surname into some kind of sort of title case, so that the T of Titchmarsh is uppercased. Luckily, there is a function within the .NET framework that will do that for us. What I have to do effectively is to create a culture info. Okay, equals thread dot current thread dot current culture. Okay, and what this effectively is doing, because obviously anything to do with strings, uppercase, lowercase, conversions, you need to know the culture ideally that the thread is running in so that you get the correct upper or lowercase functionality. Part of the culture then is the text info object that we need. Okay, again, these are all documentation will be online. Equals ci.textinfo. Okay, so at the moment, in fact, what I'm going to do is just change that slightly. Okay, so temp, I could say temp equals that. Okay, and nothing's changed. Okay, what I really need to do is to say I want that to be ti dot, now there is a convert that is to title case, okay, and I can pass in the text from the text box. That's then assigned to temp. Okay, so then I can then use that in the actual value. Remember, this line came from the base class that actually puts in that value into that field of the database, and because I've modified that field by changing the case, then job achieved. So again, let's put a breakpoint on there. Let's just clear the one we had for the password. We'll run that again. Up comes the screen, and then we're going to test it by editing the user, my username, make sure that that comes out correctly. So at the moment, as you can see, it's spelt like that. So when I go and edit it, there it is, thank you. I'm now going to make that lowercase. Okay, so when I save it, here we go. If we go and check what's in there in a second, before we do it, it's lowercase. Temp is empty at the moment, we haven't put anything in there, but I'm now going to convert the case, and when I hover over and look at that, you can see that it's correctly put the uppercase at the beginning, exactly what I wanted. This line now will save it into the database, and then I can run, and there it is, back to uppercase. So what we've tried to do today then is to try and take you through some techniques and methods of adding your own code using the code customization wizard, and make use of that documentation, because it does help you out quite enormously when knowing where to do things, where to put things. Okay, the pre-render events, the load events, the bind events, they're all there. IronSpeed knows about them, and it will help you decide where exactly to go. Now you can see down here it's put a tick box as well, so you know that something's happening. Okay, you've overridden that function. Isn't that good? Okay, validate. Yes, I validated. So at a glance within IronSpeed you can see that. So I hope that's helped. My name's been Tim Titchmarsh. We've been doing code customizations. I hope to bring you more on code customizations in the future, but for now, take care and goodbye.